You've probably beaten Radahn boss. You watch him fall, a single star tears across the sky. The crater opens, Ranni's quest continues, and like almost everyone else, you probably walked away with thinking the game has just proven one thing. Radahn was literally holding back the stars. I believed that too. It feels obvious. His death makes the stars move again, so naturally the conclusion is that he had been using gravity magic every second of his life to keep the heavens frozen. But going back through the item description, something started bothering me. Not because the Elden Ring lore contradicts itself, because it never actually says what we've all been repeating. Here is a popular subreddit statement. I don't think Radahn was holding back the stars, but I think the stars were avoiding him. That sounds like a tiny difference, but it isn't. Because one interpretation turns Radahn into a magical battery that is slowly draining himself, and the other one turns him into something much more terrifying, a warrior so feared that even the stars learned not to challenge him. The thing I did was stop thinking about what the community says and go back to what the game actually says. Whenever Radahn's greatest feat comes up, we immediately picture him locking the heavens in place with raw magical strength. But that's an image we've built ourselves actually. Item descriptions, NPCs and locations in Lands Between paint a different picture. For example, Gravity Well tells us Radahn started gravitational techniques under the Alabaster Lord. That's important because it tells us where his power came from. Then we get to collapsing stars. After mastering gravity magic, Radahn says something incredibly specific. Now I can challenge the stars. Challenge. Not restrain, not imprison, not suspend, but challenge. That isn't the language of someone preparing to cast a gigantic spell over the entire sky. That is the language of a warrior who is looking for an opponent. Then I looked at another item, the Starscourge heirloom. And again the wording surprised me. It says Radahn confronted the falling stars alone. It says he cursed them. Not once does it celebrate him for maintaining an endless magical barrier. Instead, it celebrates conquest, victory and battle. Everything about Radahn's identity is framed around defeating the stars, not babysitting them. And I started asking myself something I'd never really considered before. What if we're imagining the wrong relationship entirely? What if holding back the stars is not describing the method, but describing the result? Just imagine hearing someone say that kingdom held back an invading army. You wouldn't assume the soldiers literally stood there pushing thousands of enemies backwards every second. You'd assume they defeated enough invaders that no one wanted to attack anymore. That is exactly how I started reading Radahn. Not as someone physically freezing every star in existence, but as someone who had already won. Someone whose victories changed the behavior of his enemies. Because if the stars are capable of thought, why wouldn't they learn fear? That idea sounded ridiculous to me at first, until I remember something Elden Ring quietly tells us over and over again. The stars are not just stars, they are alive. If the item descriptions made me question the popular interpretation, Radahn's own gravity magic made me question it even more. Because once I started looking at how he fought, a pattern immediately appeared. Almost every signature ability Radahn uses has one thing in common – it pulls. Gravity Well doesn't blast enemies away, it drags them toward you. Collapsing Stars doesn't repel, it gathers everything into one point. Even Starcaller Cry follows exactly the same philosophy. Radahn roars, gravity surges outward. Everything around him is pulled into his reach before he slams it back into the ground. That isn't the fighting style of someone whose instinct is to keep threats at a distance. It's the fighting style of someone who wants his enemies close enough to kill. That is a subtle difference, but I think it matters. Because if Radahn really wanted to challenge the stars, as the item description literally tells us, then pulling them toward himself makes perfect sense. Imagine a hunter. A hunter doesn't spend his life building a fence around dangerous enemies. He lures them into range. And that is exactly how Radahn's gravity magic behaves. It doesn't create separation, it creates confrontation. And that is when another title starts making a lot more sense. Starscourge. I've always thought that title sounded oddly aggressive. Not Star Warden, not Star Keeper, not Protector of the Heavens, but Starscourge. A Scourge isn't someone who delays an enemy, but someone the enemy fears encountering. And that's exactly how legends are built throughout From Software games. The names aren't usually descriptions of magical abilities, they're reputations. Artorias wasn't remembered because he held back the Abyss, he became legendary because he fought it. Godfrey isn't remembered because he maintained peace, he remembered because he conquered. Everything about Radahn follows the same pattern. Its identity is built around defeating something. So I started wondering if we'd accidentally turned one of the greatest warriors in Elden Ring into the world's strongest construction worker. Instead of imagining Radahn endlessly holding up the sky, maybe we should imagine him doing what every description celebrates him for: fighting, winning, and earning a reputation so terrifying that eventually the stars stopped accepting the challenge. At first that sounds almost impossible, until you remember something Elden Ring quietly established long before we ever meet Radahn. The stars aren't just rocks, they are alive. Elden Ring doesn't treat stars the way we do. In our world, a star is just a celestial object. In the lands between, that line is much blurrier. The Elden Beast arrived from the stars. Estel descended from the stars. Meteor also has celestial origins. Again and again, From Software connects the heavens with living, intelligent beings. That cosmos isn't empty, it's inhabited. And once the stars become living entities, they become capable of something we rarely think about: choice. If these beings can wage wars, if they can invade, influence fate, why couldn't they also learn, remember, and fear? Now think about Radahn's story from their perspective. Imagine being one of those celestial beings. Again and again, one warrior drags you kind out of the heavens and destroys them. Every attempt to descend ends the same way. Eventually, would you keep trying, or would you wait? That is the interpretation I can't stop thinking about, because it transforms one of the Elden Ring's most famous events into something almost psychological. Radahn isn't physically pinning every star in the universe. His existence alone is enough to prevent another invasion, not because the stars are trapped, but because they are cautious. And suddenly one of the game's most iconic moments looks completely different. When Radahn dies, what actually happens? Most people describe it like someone released a massive break. The stars were frozen, the spell ends, everything starts moving again. Seems simple, but is that really what we see? Not exactly. We don't watch the heavens instantly collapse. We don't see thousands of stars rushing forward at once. Instead, one great star breaks free, and then fate begins moving again. That sequence always felt a little strange to me if the stars had literally been locked in place. But if they had simply been waiting, it makes much more sense. Imagine an army staring across a battlefield. The one general they fear finally falls. Nobody charges immediately. One soldier steps forward first, then another. Then the entire army realizes he's really gone, the path is open. That is exactly how I picture the stars. Not obeying gravity, not escaping prison, simply realizing the Starscourge is dead. And for the first time in years, the sky is safe again. I'm not saying the popular interpretation is impossible. When Radahn dies, the stars begin moving again, that's a fact. The question isn't whether his death changed the heavens, the question is how. And I think that is where the community quietly filled in a gap the game never actually explains. Some people argue that Radahn spent every waking moment sustaining an enormous gravity spell. Others suggest it was a single spell that continued after it was cast, much like many magical seals we see throughout the lands between. Some even believe Radahn was preventing fate itself from advancing rather than physically stopping celestial bodies. Every one of those ideas is possible. From Software rarely tells us how something works. Instead, the developers shows us the outcome and lets us argue over the cause. But here's why I keep coming back to this different interpretation. It makes Radahn feel more Radahn. Everything we know about him points toward one defining characteristic. He doesn't avoid impossible battles, he seeks for them. He idolizes Godfrey not because Godfrey ruled the kingdom, but because he conquered one. He learned gravity magic so he could keep riding Leonard, yes. But according to his own spell description, he also wanted to challenge the stars. Not survive them, but challenge. That ambition fits the Radahn we fight. Even after Scarlet Rod destroys his mind, he still charges head first into combat. He roars into the skies. He pulls enemies closer instead of keeping them away. He's never portrayed as a passive defender. He's always the aggressor. So when I read Starscourge, I don't imagine a man quietly maintaining an invisible cosmic barrier. I imagine the greatest warrior of the demigods looking up at the night sky and deciding, if something dangerous is coming from up there, I'll fight that too. That feels completely in character. And suddenly another small detail becomes much more interesting. After Radahn dies, we don't see the panic. We don't see an immediate rain of stars, we see a single brilliant meteor crossing the sky, almost like the heavens are testing whether the path is finally clear. Maybe that is just gameplay. Maybe it's simply how From Software choose to visualize Ranni's quest progressing. Or maybe it's the first star brave enough to return. Thanks for watching, hit that like button and subscribe for more Elden Ring and other Souls-like games, lore and guide videos, and stay sharp out there, Tarnished.